President of COP26. We start with Stuart C. MacDonald.
One, please, Mr. Speaker.
President.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in regular contact with Cabinet colleagues on COP26, including on coordinating our international engagement. The Prime Minister and ministers across government are raising climate change with international counterparts to secure ambitious climate commitments by November this year.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the President agree that diplomatic efforts ahead of COP will need to be more than discussions with other states, but with non-state actors as well? And what discussions is he having with NGOs, and in particular the Under 2 coalition ahead of COP, and what role does he envisage them playing in November?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point. We want this to be the most inclusive COP ever. As he will know, we've set up a Civil Society and Youth Advisory Group, which is an opportunity for groups from the Global South, the Global North, to come together and discuss issues. And I can say to him that ahead of the Climate and Development Ministerial meeting we had on the 31st of March, we took a lot of feedback from this grouping in terms of deciding what we needed to discuss.
We now come to Durham Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many stakeholders who would normally engage at COP26, civil society, NGO, politicians, business leaders, still don't have clarity about how they will engage at COP in November. I understand the difficulties related to the pandemic, but can the President give the House an update today when guidance will be provided to stakeholders about online versus offline and whether presence will be allowed in Glasgow?
Mr. Speaker, I've always been clear, and I reiterated this in a speech I gave in Glasgow with 6 months to go to COP, that we want this to be a physical event. That is the basis on which we are planning, and we are ensuring that we're exploring all measures to ensure this is COVID secure, it's safe for the people of Glasgow, and of course safe for participants as well.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Deirdre Bowe. Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent G7 agreement on an international minimum corporation tax shows the significant progress that can be made at such forums. What can the President-designate tell us about the environmental Marshall Plan the Prime Minister reportedly intends pursuing at the G7? And how will that impact on the discussions he's currently having with other countries in his capacity as COP President?
Mr. Speaker, matters related to what G7 leaders are discussing will of course come forward in the communique at the end of that process, and that's up to the Prime Minister and his fellow leaders. What I can tell her is that we had a successful Climate and Environment Ministers meeting of the G7, which I co-chaired together with the DEFRA Secretary of State, and in that we made commitments in terms of overwhelmingly decarbonising power systems in the 2030s in the G7 countries, but also commitments on phasing out fossil fuel support overseas.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 4 and 5 together. The Prime Minister's 10-point plan sets out our blueprint for a green industrial revolution. The plan invests in green technologies and industries, leverages billions of pounds of private sector investment to create and support up to 250,000 highly skilled green jobs and level up across the UK.
And that's very welcome, Mr. Speaker, but building back better after COVID can't just apply to us here in the United Kingdom. There absolutely has to be a global approach. So is he frustrated that the big emitters like Australia, Japan, South Korea and Russia have only resubmitted their previous climate pledges, and indeed, worse, Brazil has backtracked on their climate pledge? What's he doing to convince them that to meet their fair share is important so that we can meet the 45% reduction in emissions to keep our climate change within 1.5 degrees?
Mr. Speaker, I just say to him that when the UK took on the COP26 presidency, less than 30% of the global economy was covered by a net zero target. That is now 70%. All of the G7 countries have committed to 2030 NDCs which are aligned with net zero by 2050. And of course, he's right. We want all countries, particularly the big emitters, to come forward with ambitious emissions reduction targets.
Pat Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The credibility of the COP presidency rests on demonstrable climate change action at home. However, the decision by the government back in 2015 to scrap the zero carbon homes legislation of the Labour government meant that we've lost 1 million zero carbon homes in this past 5 years. It's a simple question. Why is it this government seems to want to allow non-zero carbon homes to continue to be built?
Mr. Speaker, I would point out to him that the UK is the country in the G20 which has decarbonised our economy fastest since the year 2000. He will know that the Secretary of State for BEIS is working on a heat and as a housing and decarbonisation strategy as well. That will come forward, and of course we will set out our net zero strategy ahead of COP26.
Demi Moore.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I thank my honourable friend for the work that he does as a trade envoy in North Africa. And of course, I and fellow ministers speak, and indeed our whole diplomatic network, speak and engage with governments across the world, including in North Africa. In recent months, I've spoken with ministers in a range of countries, including Morocco, Sudan and Egypt, which I visited in February.
My right honourable friend, what plans there are to sustain engagement in this region in the forthcoming months?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are working proactively with countries in the region through our COP26 Energy Transition Council. We co-chair the Adaptation Action Coalition with Egypt, and we will continue to engage in North Africa, which is one of the regions most vulnerable to climate change.
Anthony Mr. Speaker. Vice President
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sustainability groups and wider civil society are essential partners to the UK presidency with their links to communities most impacted by climate change. This is why we've established the COP26 Civil Society and Youth Advisory Council, allowing a regular dialogue with these groups as we plan for COP26. And DEFRA have also launched this week the Plant for Our Planet campaign to encourage all our own constituents, and perhaps my honourable friend, to think about the natural world and how we live and work better within it.
Speaker, and can I ask whether or not the President and indeed the Vice President of COP26 would engage with my constituents and the sustainability groups that we have? It's incredibly welcome to hear the steps they're already taking, but we would really like to see a Devonian perspective on COP26 this year.
Thank you. Well-managed agriculture is going to be a critical contributor to our planet's climate solutions, Mr. Speaker, and the UK wishes to use its COP26 presidency to drive the global transition to sustainable agriculture and land use, and we're committed to using our presidency platform to amplify local climate action. So I'm delighted to hear about the activity being led in my honourable friend's constituency, and COP unit officials will be very happy to follow up to meet with them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Devon isn't the only area that's leading the way in developing community action plans. And indeed, the South Shropshire Climate Action Group has produced the first constituency-wide action plan, which I would be delighted to present both to the President and to the Vice President, my right honourable friend, following this session. Will there be scope for community groups such as this that are leading the way in finding practical ways for communities to help get to net zero, to attend COP26 in Glasgow to spread this great practice?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're really fortunate in the UK, as demonstrated, to have a passionate civil society who are amongst world leaders in demonstrating climate action. The UK launched the domestic Together for Our Planet campaign to celebrate climate initiatives across the UK and to inspire the public, and clearly they are already inspired, to be more engaged in climate action in the run-up to COP26. So I'd be delighted to receive further information on the climate action from Ludlow, as well as any other constituency that wishes to submit, because I think to be able to share that is absolutely what COP26 is all about.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we are working with the Welsh Government and indeed the other devolved administrations to ensure an inclusive and ambitious summit for the whole of the UK. I have spoken with Welsh Government ministers at the COP26 Devolved Administrations Ministerial Group, which I chair, and I look forward to speaking to Julie James, the Welsh Government's new Minister for Climate Change, at the group's next meeting, which is taking place tomorrow.
Mr. Speaker, offshore energy generation will have a vital role to play in achieving Wales's energy, economic, decarbonisation and well-being goals. Yet we're operating at the moment with one hand tied behind our backs because the Crown Estates has sole responsibility for allowing development on the seabed. What discussions has he had with the Welsh Government about devolving the Crown Estates in Wales to Wales, as is the case in Scotland, as part of the British Government's COP26 legacy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, that of course I am talking to the devolved administrations, but the role of the COP presidency is to ensure that we get consensus across 197 parties. But I know that my right honourable friend, the Vice President, as she's now styled, is also the Energy Minister and the adaptation champion, and she'd be very happy to discuss these matters with him.
Sir Robert Neal. Number 10, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As incoming COP President, the UK is committed to reducing all greenhouse gas emissions and is encouraging all countries to raise their climate ambition in nationally determined contribution and long-term strategies ahead of COP26. The UK announced its NDC in December last year, which is an all-economy target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% by 2030 on 1990 levels. And the UK's sixth carbon budget will require UK greenhouse gas emissions to reduce by 78% by 2035. The emission scope of these targets does include methane.
Sir Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot of the debate and discussion does focus upon reducing carbon, reducing the carbon footprint, of course. I'm glad that the Minister includes methane, because, of course, as she will know, over the course of 20 years, 1 tonne of methane will warm the atmosphere about 86 times more than 1 tonne of carbon. Given that the UN and the Climate and Clean Air Coalition report demonstrates that you can nearly halve those emissions by 2030 by using existing technology, will my right honourable friend commit that the government will make securing commitments to reduction of methane as well a priority at the upcoming COP conference?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the UK, we are tackling methane emissions domestically through supporting the agriculture sector to reduce its emissions further through the Agricultural Transition Plan. We have made good progress already to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. In our domestic agriculture sector, we produce a litre of milk with 17% less greenhouse gas emissions and a kilogramme of pork with 40% less greenhouse gas emissions than in 1990. And in our role as COP President, the UK has established a new international dialogue to raise international ambition on the transition to sustainable agriculture, with around 20 countries currently participating.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
The Government is introducing legislation to transform our environment through the Environment Bill, including measures to improve how we manage our resources and waste. And we continue to work with other countries to move towards a resource-efficient and circular economy.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful for the VP's answer. I've had many conversations with schools around my patch of passionate young people from St Margaret's School, from St Martin's School, from South Charnwood School, who are dedicated to recycling. And they wanted me to ask, will the government consider asking for international targets on recycling rates to drive up recycling across the globe?
Like my honourable friend, the school children in my own constituency are passionate and regularly communicating with me about reducing waste and reusing materials. The government's view is that taking action is the best way to drive progress, and harnessing that consumer power to drive changes for packaging use, I think, in the goods that we all buy. And I think our children are the ones who are going to help all of us as parents across the country to help drive that. But domestically, we're introducing the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme to ensure that producers cover the full net cost of recovery for packaging waste, and a deposit return scheme to increase the recycling of drinks containers. That will help us to achieve a 65% recycling rate by 2035.
Chris Brown.
12, Mr. Speaker.
Through the COP26 Nature Campaign, we are driving action to protect and restore forests and critical ecosystems, as well as helping to catalyse a sustainable transition of the agriculture sector and food systems through our forest, agriculture and commodity trade dialogues.
Chris Green.
Speaker, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for what he's doing. Can I ask him to step up the work he's doing on ensuring that protecting ecosystems is a part of the agreement we hope will be reached at COP? I know we have the summit in China, but the protection of habitats and ecosystems around the world is so much an important part of dealing with climate change that I hope it'll be part of the deal in the autumn. But can I also ask him to put some pressure on the Brazilian government over the measures that appear to be happening there that could accelerate rather than reduce the loss of the Amazon rainforest?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises a very important point. He will know that the UK co-led the development of the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which almost 90 leaders from around the world have endorsed, committing to global action to protect nature. And of course, we are campaigning for strong biodiversity targets to be set at the Biodiversity COP in Kunming this October. And as you would expect, I am in contact with the Brazilian government as well.
Right. We now have a substantive question to Minister Tremel.
We're exploring opportunities for strengthened international collaboration on innovation focused on the bioeconomy through Mission Innovation, a global initiative to enable affordable clean energy and achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Leveraging growth of the bioeconomy will support clean growth across multiple sectors and contribute towards achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050.
Let's go to Rachel Maskell. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The climate crisis is turbocharged as the trajectory of mitigation ever deviates from planet-saving targets, while the government moves at a glacial pace to establish a climate economy. Yorkshire will not only create 4,000 new jobs and upskill 25,000 people, it will lay the foundations for world-beating research in biosciences here in York and Yorkshire, offsetting carbon and waste. All we ask is for government to bring forward the funding already committed ahead of COP26. Will she agree to do this and meet with me to discuss the project and the importance of Yorkshire?
I'm always happy to meet with all new and really interesting, innovative projects. I'm very happy to commit to do that and we can discuss them. I think we are absolutely leading the way in this, and Mission Innovation is an extraordinary organisation driving some of the most forward-thinking processes and shining a light on them, because one of the key challenges to helping the developing countries to be able to move to clean growth is that the technologies that UK businesses and our scientists invent and take to market can actually be used in those developing countries.
Substantive question to President Sharma.
Mr. Speaker, the UK is committed to championing diversity and inclusion throughout our COP26 presidency. More than 45% of the senior management team in the COP26 unit are women, including our Chief Operating Officer and Communications Director, and around half of the COP26 negotiating team are women.
Let's go to Brenda Sharma. Brenda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later this year, I'm hosting the British South Asian Youth Summit, focusing on COP26. Will the Minister meet with our youth champions to hear the perspective of young people living in some of the areas of the world most vulnerable to climate change?
Mr. Speaker, as I said in response to an earlier question, of course we have the Civil Society Youth Advisory Group. There are co-chairs, young climate activists, one from the Global South and one from the Global North. And on every visit that I do, I meet youth activists. Of course, I'm very happy to look at the event that he's talking about, and if my diary permits, I will certainly come to it.
Peter Bull.
15, sir.
Mr. Speaker, our overarching objective is to keep within reach the target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. To do this, we're asking countries to set out ambitious emissions reduction commitments, come forward with plans to protect communities and nature, mobilise finance and reach agreement on the outstanding elements of the Paris Rulebook.
To see you back. Peter Bull.
Mr. Speaker, you will remember when David Cameron was hugging huskies, and I thought it was a great idea to try and do something to save the planet. So I got rid of my polluting petrol car, bought a biofuel car, and then discovered I was destroying the rainforest. So I knew what to do next: get CO2 down, buy a diesel car. Now I know that when I drive along the street, I'm poisoning people. So could the President please give me some advice? Before buying an electric car, will he assure me that the mining of cobalt and lithium isn't killing people in the mines? Or would it just be easier for me to buy a horse?
Well, it will certainly be sustainable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleased to hear that my honourable friend is indeed a climate activist at heart. It's a revelation for all of us. It's great that he's made a decision to purchase an electric vehicle. I can tell him he won't be disappointed. Plug-in grants are available, and he knows the government is also back in the sector with almost £3 billion worth of support.
Shadow Minister Matthew Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the President knows, the International Energy Association's latest World Energy Outlook makes clear that a net zero pathway for global energy requires that there be no new fossil fuel supply beyond projects already committed as of this year. That means not just coal, but also oil and gas. The report reinforces, Mr. Speaker, the obvious need to secure agreement on a global framework for a managed and fair phase-out of fossil fuels. Could the President tell the House, therefore, whether he accepts the IEA's conclusion, and if so, whether ending all new fossil fuel supply from next year will be incorporated into the objectives of the UK's presidency of COP26?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I actually commissioned that report, and I'm very pleased that it is so substantive. Of course, he's right. What we need to make sure is to help all countries with a clean energy transition, and that is what we are doing through the work of the COP26 Energy Transition Council.
Robert Halfon.
One, sir.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago I co-chaired the G7 Climate and Environment Ministers track with my Right Honourable friend, the Deputy Secretary of State. At this meeting, the G7 nations agreed to overwhelmingly decarbonise their power systems in the 2030s, consistent with their 2030 NDCs and net zero commitments, and in addition, they committed to take concrete steps to end support for international coal power generation by the end of 2021. This is a critical step in consigning coal power to history and accelerating the international transition to clean energy.
Robert Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we welcome plans for a cleaner, greener Britain, but can my right honourable friend give reassurances to my hard-working Harlow residents that the government's environmental measures will not mean a more expensive Britain hitting the low paid with extra costs and increasing the cost of living for ordinary folk?
Mr. Speaker, the government is indeed committed to getting the transition to net zero right for all consumers. We're committed to driving savings and making our homes better insulated with more energy efficient measures. And indeed, he will know that through the energy company obligation and the expanded warm homes discount, we will provide at least £4.7 billion of extra support to low income and vulnerable households between 2022 and 2026.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for a successful COP26, we have a particular responsibility as hosts to build trust with developing countries. The government's decision to cut aid spending, the only G7 country to do so, is therefore an appalling one, not just because it's wrong in principle, but because it's staggeringly self-defeating. Now, he knows the decision makes a successful outcome at the COP harder, not easier. So can I invite him to add his voice to the powerful calls we heard yesterday, including from the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, to immediately restore government aid spending to 0.7% of GDP?
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, the UK is doubling its international climate finance commitment to support developing countries, and I can tell him this has been very much welcomed around the world. With regards to the overall ODA spend, as he knows, this is a temporary measure, and as the economic situation improves, I hope it will be possible to restore the 0.7 target at the earliest opportunity.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is that cutting aid spending severely undermines the ability of developing countries to tackle the challenges of climate, poverty and public health, and he knows that, and that's what developing countries are telling him in the negotiations. We need vulnerable countries to be calling for more ambition from big emitters like China, but they're going to be much more reticent to do so when they don't feel we can be trusted. Now, totemic on the issue of trust is the promise made at Copenhagen for $100 billion of public and private finance for developing countries. More than a decade on, it still hasn't been delivered. It's our job as hosts to deliver on this promise. So can he therefore tell us, will the $100 billion finally be delivered this weekend at the G7 meeting?
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right. The $100 billion is a totemic figure, and we are doing everything we can to ensure that we are able to deliver that by COP26. And I can assure him that I am having very frank discussions with donor countries, with developed countries, to ensure that they deliver on this commitment that was made in 2009.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Does the COP presidency share my concern at the reputational hit that the UK will take in the event that it continues to approve old-style carbon-belching waste incinerators like the one proposed at Westbury in my constituency?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All energy from waste plants in England are regulated by the Environment Agency and must comply with the strict emissions limits set down in legislation. I'm aware that Northacre Renewable Energy Limited has applied for an environmental permit from the Environment Agency to operate an incinerator in Westbury, Wiltshire, and the Environment Agency is considering responses to the public consultation.
Let's go to Joanna Cherry. Joanna.
Mr. Speaker, 11% of Scottish renewable generation comes from small projects like Harlow
hydro in my constituency. So ahead of COP26, will the government introduce a replacement for the feed-in tariff, which is better placed to encourage similar new projects than the Smart Export Guarantee Scheme?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will be launching a new contract for difference auction in at the end of this year, and the opportunity for a number of smaller sources of energy storage will be available.
Michael Longit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister detail what steps he has taken to engage with the G7 ahead of COP26?
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for all the work he's doing in Dudley in terms of supporting the local economy and green jobs. And as I set out earlier, I co-chaired the G7 Climate and Environment Ministers meeting, which came forward with some ambitious commitments.
The world's not currently on track to meet our Paris targets, are we? The current pledges only add up to less than 10% emissions, and we need 45% to meet the target. In the last parliamentary session, 109 MPs signed the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. When it is reintroduced, will the government give time to debate this bill, just so, as we did with the Climate Change Act 2008, we can lead the world on legislation, not just follow?
President Sharma.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would recommend that he talks to the Leader of the House on the matters of the timetabling for debates and other events in this House. What I would say to him is that we are working very hard and pressing all the big emitters to ensure they come forward with the ambition that is required to be able to halve emissions by 2030.
Mr. Speaker, I'm currently doing a lot of work in my constituency with people on the climate agenda in preparation for the COP summit. And local school children and young people are particularly interested and have asked me, one child in particular has asked me to raise this question with the President. To beat climate change, we've got to look at it as a whole world. Surely this means giving more, not less, help to poorer countries to help them make the changes needed to save our planet.
President Sharma.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raised the issue with me. I've set out the position when it comes to overseas aid. In terms of schools, we are engaging, and I hope I will shortly be able to send out a pack which will encourage young people around our schools to get even more involved in COP26.